I'm Aaron. Standing at my wedding reception, I watched in disbelief as my father, Charles, stood up, straightened his tie, and walked over to me with an invoice. It wasn't a card or a kind-hearted toast on a cocktail napkin. It was an invoice printed on the letterhead of his family-owned antique shop, Millfield Antiques. The same paper he used to bill customers for rare vases and old books. He laid it in front of me, right between the champagne flute and the wedding cake, and said, "It's time we settled up, sweetheart." The 140 guests in the room went dead silent. My new husband, Ryan, reached for my knee under the tablecloth. I looked down at the total, $240,000. The cost of raising me, itemized and due in full. But what they didn't know was that I had an envelope, too. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Millfield, a small town with a population of about 25,000. Everyone knew everyone else's business, and half of them had an opinion about it. My father, Charles, had inherited Millfield Antiques from his father, Henry, who opened it in 1958. Henry was a strict man. He believed that nothing in life came for free, not even family. Charles, being the only son who stayed in town, took over the shop and adopted his father's philosophy. My mother, Lydia, was a gentle-natured woman who had dreams of becoming a painter. But after she married Charles and had me, those dreams faded away. She became the bookkeeper for our family, meticulously tracking every expense related to me and my younger sister, Lily. When I was 8 years old, on Christmas morning, most kids would tear through the wrapping paper with excitement. But in our house, things were different. My father sat in his armchair with a ledger and a calculator. As Lily and I opened each gift, he read out the price. A porcelain doll for $50, a set of watercolor paints for $30, and a wooden rocking horse for $120. When we were done, he added up the total and announced, "This Christmas cost us $200. My mother just nodded, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Lily, who was 5 at the time, didn't understand, but I did. I realized that these gifts were not acts of love, they were just line items in my father's ledger. From that year on, I stopped asking for things. The following summer, I was really into painting. I wanted to attend a local art camp. I had been practicing for months, using the old paints I found in the attic. My father pulled out the brochure, circled the tuition of $800, and stuck it on the fridge with a magnet. "This is money we won't get back," he said. He let me go, but that number stayed on the fridge for years, yellowing and curling at the edges, like a reminder of my debt. My mother kept a small notebook in the kitchen drawer. One day, when I was looking for a pencil, I found it. Each page had my name or Lily's at the top, with columns of numbers for dates, amounts, and categories. She had been tracking what we cost since we were born. I put the notebook back without saying a word. I thought every family was like this, that love always came with a price tag. As I approached my senior year of high school, my father called a family meeting. In our family, a family meeting meant either someone was in trouble or someone needed money, and often, it was both. He sat at the kitchen table with a manila folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed on the Millfield Antiques letterhead. He called it the Family Investment Agreement. The language was a bit clumsy, but the meaning was clear. It stated that Charles and Lydia had invested a significant amount of money in my upbringing, and upon achieving financial independence, I would make reasonable efforts to repay the family investment. There were 2 signature lines at the bottom, one for him and one for me. "It's just a formality," he said. "So we're all on the same page." My mother stood at the counter, pretending to dry a dish that was already dry. She didn't look at me. I was 17 at the time. I had a scholarship to a good art college, but there was still a gap between the scholarship and the tuition. Refusing to sign meant no help from my parents, and the help they could offer was only about $2,500. But it was the principle of the matter. I knew it wasn't a legally binding contract, a minor under duress signing a contract with no specific terms and no consideration. It wouldn't hold up in court. But I signed it because I knew fighting would cost me more than just agreeing. I remember looking over at Lily. She was 14, standing in the hallway, half hidden behind the door frame, watching. There was no sympathy on her face, just a look like she was taking inventory. I got into the art college. I had a full ride for tuition, but I had to pay for my room and board. I worked 2 jobs. I was a barista at a local coffee shop from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. And I did graphic design work for a small advertising agency in the evenings. I ate a lot of instant noodles and studied in the library because my apartment was too cold in winter and too hot in summer. I graduated with a 3.9 GPA and passed the certification exam for graphic designers on my first try. My father's reaction? That investment paid off, he said over the phone while he was rearranging the antiques in the shop. No congratulations, no card, just a cold assessment of his return on investment. My first real job was at a medium-sized design firm in the city. I had a salary of $60,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for me to breathe a little easier. 3 months into the job, my father called. The antique shop needed a new security system. Could I help? I sent $1,000 that afternoon without thinking twice. He was my dad, and the shop was his livelihood. Over the next few years, the requests kept coming. The roof of the shop needed repairs, Lily needed a new laptop for school, and the property tax bill was overdue. I sent money every time, via direct deposit, without asking questions. After the second year, I started keeping a spreadsheet. It wasn't out of anger, it was just a professional habit as a designer who was used to tracking projects. I created a file called Family Transfers with columns for date, amount, purpose, payment method, and running total. At the time, I thought I was just being organized. Little did I know I was building evidence. In the 3rd year, my father called about the shop's air conditioning system. It needed to be replaced, and it would cost $15,000. He didn't ask, he just presented it as a fact. The contractor says it has to be done before summer. I can't afford it, he said. I transferred the money from my savings that week. He said, that's what family does, but he didn't say thank you. In the 4th year, Lily's car broke down. She needed a reliable vehicle for her part-time job at the shop. I sent $4,000 for a used car. In the 5th year, my father had a back injury. He had insurance, but the deductible and co-pays added up to $10,000. I paid it in installments. He never mentioned it again. In the 6th year, the shop needed a major renovation. New flooring, updated display cases, and better lighting. It cost $25,000. I dipped into my emergency fund for the first time. Sitting in my apartment, looking at my bank balance afterward, I started to wonder if I was doing the right thing. I added a new column to my spreadsheet called Acknowledged, to track whether anyone in my family had said thank you or even confirmed they received the money. After the renovation payment, every single row in that column said no. On Thanksgiving of the 7th year, I drove the 2-hour journey back to Millfield. The house smelled like turkey, but there was also an underlying tension. Lily was in the kitchen, talking on the phone. She didn't know I was in the hallway. I heard her say, she got the degree and got out. The least she can do is pay us back. I stopped in my tracks. She wasn't wrong about the facts, but the way she framed it made every dollar I'd sent feel like an obligation, not a choice. Dinner was even worse. My mother started by saying, must be nice to eat at fancy restaurants every week. I had posted a photo of dinner with a coworker at a sushi place on social media. My father waited until dessert to say, you know, the agreement still stands. He said it as casually as if he was talking about the weather. That night, on the drive back to the city, I thought about my life and the money I'd been sending home. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my spreadsheet and added a new column called What They Think I Owe. I filled it in using the numbers from my mother's notebook that I'd memorized over the years. I met Ryan at an art exhibition. He was a 35-year-old architect. His parents, David and Susan, were warm and welcoming. The first time I went to their house for dinner, Susan hugged me at the door and said, "I made too much lasagna, so you have to take some home." Nobody mentioned the cost of the food, and nobody slid a receipt across the table. I felt like I was in a different world. Ryan proposed to me on a rooftop in the city, under the stars. I said yes before he even finished the question. We planned our wedding ourselves and paid for it with our savings. It cost $30,000 for the venue, a band, a caterer, and flowers. My parents wanted control over the guest list. My father called it their share of the invitations. I said no. He called Ryan directly and said, "You're getting a bargain. We put a lot into that girl." Ryan told me about the call that night, looking confused. I wasn't. I'd been hearing that kind of language my whole life. 3 months before the wedding, my aunt, Clara, my father's sister who lived in the neighboring town, called to congratulate me. Then she said, "Your father says you haven't helped much with the shop, but I know you've been busy building your career." I held the phone away from my face and stared at it. He said I haven't helped much? I thanked her and hung up. Then I called my cousin Ethan, in another city. He told me the same thing. My father had painted me as the ungrateful daughter who got out and forgot her roots. I realized that my parents weren't just taking my money, they were rewriting the story. To the extended family, I was the bad guy. I opened my spreadsheet and added a notes column, documenting every conversation, the dates, names, and what was said. And then, when a bill for the shop's liability insurance came in the mail, I paid another $4,500 out of habit. 1 week before the wedding, I drove back to Millfield. Ryan would follow in 2 days with his parents. I booked a room at the local inn. My mother was offended. "We have a guest room," she said on the phone. "It has clean sheets." I told her I needed space to work on last-minute details, but in truth, I couldn't sleep under that roof and keep my sanity. The week was tense. My mother had opinions about everything, from the centerpieces to the wedding programs. She wanted the pastor from her church, not the one Ryan and I had chosen. My father was oddly cheerful. He smiled too much, patted his jacket pocket, and whistled in the shop. I knew something was coming. On Wednesday, I stopped by the shop to drop off the wedding programs. Lily was behind the counter. There was a FedEx receipt crumpled next to the register. "Picking up a print job?" I asked. She quickly shoved the receipt into a drawer. "None of your business." On Thursday, Ryan's parents arrived. Susan brought a box of homemade cookies. She hugged me in the lobby of the inn and said, "I'm so happy for you." David shook my hand and then hugged me too. "Welcome to the family, kiddo." It was a stark contrast to my own family's behavior. The rehearsal dinner was at a local barbecue joint. Ryan's choice. I loved him for it. There were about 40 people, family, the wedding party, and a few close friends. David stood up first. He held a beer in one hand and a napkin in the other and said, "Ryan, you found a wonderful one. Aaron, you found a stubborn one. That's a great combination." Everyone laughed. Susan dabbed her eyes. Then my father stood up. The atmosphere in the room changed. It was like a barometric pressure drop before a storm. He buttoned his jacket, cleared his throat, and said, "Raising Aaron was the greatest investment Lydia and I ever made." The word investment landed like a heavy stone in the room. He continued, "Some investments take decades to mature. You put in the capital, do the work, and when they finally pay off, it's time to collect." He winked at my mother, and Lily raised her glass. Most of the people in the room laughed nervously, but a few exchanged glances. After dinner, on the way to the car, Ryan took my hand and asked, "Was your dad joking?" I thought about the FedEx receipt, my father's cheerful whistling, and the padding of his jacket pocket. "I don't think so," I said. That night, in the hotel lobby, Lily was waiting for me. It was 10:30 p.m. Ryan had gone upstairs, and I was getting ice. "Aaron," she said in a flat, practiced tone. "Mom and Dad have something planned for the reception. It's an itemized presentation about making things right." I set the ice bucket on the counter. "What kind of itemized?" I asked. "It's about the money they've spent on you," she said. "There's an envelope." I realized that my wedding reception was going to be an ambush. I sat on the edge of the bed in my hotel room, looking at my spreadsheet. I considered my options. Option 1 was to confront my parents before the wedding, drive to their house, and tell them I knew about the envelope. But I knew they'd just find another way to present the bill. Option 2 was to ignore it, let my father hand me the envelope, and deal with it later. But 140 guests would watch, and my silence would look like acceptance. Option 3 was to prepare. I opened my laptop and added the recent transfers to my spreadsheet, the insurance premium, the car repair for Lily, and the property tax assist. I double-checked the amounts against my bank statements. My hands were steady. Numbers were my friends, they didn't have feelings and they didn't ambush you at your wedding. I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet for the first time in 6 years. The total was $267,340. I sat there in shock. I'd been sending money for 8 years, but I'd never once added it all up. I realized that I'd already paid more than what my father was going to ask for. At 2:17 a.m. I went down to the business center of the hotel in my pajamas. I printed 8 pages of my spreadsheet data, each page clean and each column aligned. Then I typed a summary page with yearly totals, a cumulative total, and a brief description of each major payment. I created a cover page with the title Invoice, Services Rendered to Charles and Lydia in bold, centered text. I printed it all, 10 pages in total, stapled them in order, and slid them into a plain white envelope. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up early. I showered, ate a little breakfast, and drove to my bridesmaid's room for hair and makeup. My bridesmaid, Sarah, saw the envelope in my bag. "What's that?" she asked. "Insurance policy," I said. She didn't push. I put on my wedding dress, a beautiful outline ivory gown that I'd paid for myself. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I thought about the little girl who wasn't allowed to ask for things at Christmas, who ate cheap food and wore hand-me-downs. That girl was getting married today, and she was ready. I handed Sarah the envelope. "If I ask for this during the reception, hand it to me." "No questions," I said. Sarah took it and looked at my face for a long time. She was a nurse and could read people well. She just nodded and said, "No questions." The wedding ceremony was beautiful. The old church was filled with 140 guests, both families, friends, and coworkers. Ryan's vows were simple and sincere. "I promise to love you without conditions. I promise to never keep score." I knew what those words meant to someone like me, who grew up in a house where every kindness came with a price. My vows were the same. I promise to love you without conditions. I promise that what we build together will never come with an invoice. After the ceremony, we had photos taken. My father smiled, but his hand kept going to his jacket pocket. The reception was held at a beautiful old barn. The DJ played our first dance song, and Ryan held me close and whispered, "You okay?" I said, "Ask me in an hour." Toasts came after dinner. Ryan's best man told a funny story about him getting lost on a construction site. The room roared with laughter. Then Sarah stood up. She talked about the time I helped her through a tough breakup. "Aaron gives and gives without asking for anything in return," she said. I saw my father shift in his chair. Then David stood up. He said, "Aaron, welcome home, sweetheart." It was a simple but heartfelt toast. Ryan and I both teared up. My family's table was quiet. My mother straightened the silverware, Lily scrolled through her phone, and my father sat with his arms crossed, waiting. It happened between the cake cutting and the bouquet toss. The DJ had just finished a set, and people were refilling their drinks.